Change on the Wind by TMoore. A short story of love and loss shared between a grandmother and a granddaughter. The sting of summer's stifling heat was beginning to give way to autumn's chill. The wind whipped like a belt slicing through the air. She sat alone in a creaky rocking chair on the front porch. She took comfort in the bite of the wind and in the rhythmic sound of the chair. She had not experienced much comfort in the past 3 years. She was battle weary. She had been on edge ever since that wretched doctor uttered the word cancer. At first, she had not believed that fancy man, but slowly, as time went by, she had watched her Charlie fade away. He was no longer the strapping man that she had married at the tender age of 15. It had been 3 days since her sweet Charlie had left their home and would never return. She was different, changed even. She thought herself like that canoe she had once watched on the lake. She wandered aimlessly these days, dipping and threatening to capsize without a moment's notice. Her days stretched into each other. Morning or night made no difference to her. It was only her, the wind, and that chair. All that she could manage to wish for herself was to join her Charlie. If she could not be granted this one small wish, she merely wanted to be alone. The second wish was granted. Everyone came, and then they went. They tried to keep their voices low during the arguments, the ones as to who got what now that he was gone. Yet she heard them all. She would dream that the cold wind would come and snatch her up and take her far, far away. Yet every morning she awoke into the same world, even lonelier than the day before. The days of making beds and cooking hearty breakfast were gone. She often chose only coffee for herself. The daily task no longer held anything special for her. She could care less whether she bathed or even slightly looked presentable. She would simply sit in that rocker and go miles and miles without ever leaving the porch. She was sure that she could hear her long-gone mama call her to dinner. Her voice carried on the wind. She longed to return to her mama and daddy. They always knew how to make things better. Surely they could tell her where to find peace. More than 700 miles away, the grandchild that she mostly raised sat in painful silence. The granddaughter knew that she had lost herself along the way, and it hurt her greatly that she could not, or maybe it would be more honest to say, would not figure out a way to find herself again. She would sometimes call the old woman, but mostly she was too busy. After all, she had a family, a job to look after, and more problems than she could count. She could not waste time on endless phone calls. Sometimes the granddaughter would even travel back to her hometown, but she could not make herself go see the old woman. When the granddaughter would visit, the awkwardness and silence were suffocating. Seeing the old woman made her feel a mixture of sadness, intertwined with great guilt. Even the rare telephone conversations that came few and far between. On those occasions, the granddaughter was short-tempered and would end up snapping at the old woman. She didn't mean to. It just seemed to happen. The old woman that she knew and loved was gone. There was no longer a sparkle in her eye. She didn't talk or teach anymore. All she did was rock in that accursed chair and wait. The granddaughter was not sure what she was waiting on, but she hated it just the same. Then it happened. Suddenly, the old woman was sick. She went into the hospital. The granddaughter didn't pay it much mind. She thought back to all the times the old woman would be sick, and she thought her a hypochondriac. Surely this would be like all the other times. She did call once, but the old woman couldn't stay awake long enough to talk to her. The granddaughter was just too busy to make the long drive. She was certain the old woman would return home soon, and then she would visit when she could spare a few days. One night there was a terrible storm. Trees were twisted and tossed here and there. The power went out. When morning came, the granddaughter awoke and stepped out into the new day. The sky was calm and promised a day full of peace. But the wind felt as if it could cut her to shreds. She knew that something was wrong, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The granddaughter was trying to wrangle children to their proper school drop offs. She almost didn't accept the call. But the way that the wind tangled and tugged at her hair made her stop and answer. The old woman was gone. How could this be? The old woman had cried wolf for years. The granddaughter always thought it was just for attention, but now she stood numb. Numb to the pain that her children felt as she shooed them out of the car to school. It was as though she were alone in this loss. She didn't even think that her children would be suffering too. Off she went to work. She could not bear the thought of being home alone. Pain filled her heart, and her brain kept bringing memory after memory of the times that she spoke harshly or didn't have the time for the old woman. The granddaughter was now the canoe threatening to capsize. Years went by. The granddaughter was consumed with guilt. It seemed to eat her from the inside out. There were so many things that wish she could go back and do differently. It tormented her day and night that she didn't make the time when it was available. Now she would cry and claw at her hair. Did the old woman know how much the granddaughter loved her? Every time the harsh wind hit her in the face, the granddaughter would remember and dissolve back into tears. They say that time heals all wounds, but the granddaughter didn't believe that for one moment. Yes, time does reduce the sting, but it never leaves. And time brings some measure of acceptance. The wind still reminds her every single time it blows in her face. But after all these years, the days of pain and tears are fewer. There are even some days that the granddaughter can face the wind, smile, and remember fondly.